Hi, this is Sneha from Collegepond, and in this part of the video lecture series, I'm going to talk to you about the TOEFL listening section. We are going to learn about what are the different question types in the listening section, how do you approach them, what are the various strategies that you can follow, and also we will look at solving some of these problems and trying to see how to apply these strategies to these questions. So hang in there with me. So the listening section is designed to measure whether you can understand daily English conversations or can you sit through a complete lecture. As you can see on the slide, you will be tested on basic comprehension, which means can you understand basic details in any given passage or a listening file. It also tests you on your practical understanding of spoken English. So can you understand a speaker's attitude from his tone? Can you understand a speaker's degree of certainty? So these are the things that basically we will look out for. Please understand that there are two types of listening questions. You will find an audio file which is a conversation between two people usually. You may also find an audio file which is like a lecture given by a professor. So you will have to get used to both these types of audio files. Your total time would be somewhere around 41 to 57 minutes for the sections. Now let's delve deeper into each of the question types of listening. Basically the audio files that you will get on the test date. As you can see on the slide in front of you, you will have about 3 to 4 lectures, and each lecture would have around 3 to 5 minutes of duration. So within each section you will have these 3 to 4 lectures. When it comes to the academic lecture, each of them will be around 500 to 800 words long. So that's not a lot actually. It happens within, you can say, 4 to 5 minutes. It will usually have a professor's monologue, or it could also be an interactive lecture where the professor is speaking and some of the students are maybe raising a doubt or communicating with the professor generally. You will also see some pictures in the background when the audio file is playing. So those pictures will give you kind of an idea about the overall setting in which the conversation is happening. After you finish listening to the conversation, you will see around 6 multiple choice questions. What domain would the lectures belong to? A lot of you might be wondering. Don't worry too much about it. It will be something related to your normal everyday lectures that you are anyways used to listening to in your college. So topics like life sciences, arts, physics, social sciences. So it's not going to be something very extraordinary and definitely not rocket sciencey. So don't have to worry too much about it. The next question type on the listening test will be your conversations. Within each section, you will have a good mix of lectures as well as conversations. So in each section, you might find that you will have around 2 or 3 conversations, and each one would last around 3 minutes. You will have around 12 to 25 interchanges. When I say interchanges, it's nothing but exchange of ideas. So in a conversation, a professor might say something and a student would respond to it. So that's one interchange. Also notice that you will see some pictures in the background where you will understand the role of the speakers. Please note that this also is a multiple choice question, and you will get around 5 questions for each conversation that you get on the test. So keep in mind. Now let's delve deeper into what type of questions will you get on the day of your test. On the listening section, you have around 7 types of questions. The first one being the purpose question. Now within the purpose type of questions, you will have 2 subsections. So one is a gist purpose or a gist content. The gist purpose is a type of question where you will be required to talk about the whole purpose of the conversation or the lecture. What is this conversation or lecture all about? The main idea, basically. When it comes to the gist content, however, that type of a question will require you to understand only the purpose of a particular speaker. Why does this speaker say this? XYZ or ABC, whatever it is that the speaker is saying. The next type of question is your specific detail questions. Now in these types of questions, you will be required to remember some specific details that you just heard about in the audio file. Next we come to the function question. In this type of a question, you are required to understand the purpose of something that will be played out again for you. You will not be required to understand the purpose of the whole passage as such or the purpose of a particular speaker, but simply a small clipping from the whole audio file will be played back to you, and you will have to understand what is the relationship of that part to the overall file that you will listen to. Another question type that you will come across is the attitude question. It will require you to understand the speaker's attitude. What does he feel about a particular thing? Is he positive about it? Is he optimistic? Is he negative? Does he agree to what is being said? So those are the speaker's attitudes, and you will need a good understanding of a speaker's tone for this particular type of a question. Another question type, very popular, is the organization question. In this type of a question, you will have to understand the structure of the whole conversation or the lecture. It will require you to understand coherence as well. Next, you will have to look at the connecting content type of questions. In these type of questions, what happens is you will have to figure out what is the relationship of ideas between different things that were said in the conversation or the lecture. Again, it requires you to do a lot of thinking when you are actually actively listening. Finally, you have the inference type of questions. In these types of questions, you need to get very good at understanding something that is not explicitly said. So you need to understand the tone, you need to understand the hidden meanings behind whatever is said in the audio files. So don't get bogged down by, when you see so many question types. It's quite natural. In the course of the test, you will be able to simply mark the answers and move forward without any problems if you understand what is expected out of you. So keep that in mind. Now let's dive deeper into the first question type, which is the purpose type of questions. In these type of questions, you will see that you will be required to understand the main idea of the whole audio that will be given to you. So you will have to either understand the main idea of the lecture or the conversation, or you will either have to understand the purpose of a particular speaker. Why does a particular speaker say X, Y, Z, right? Another thing that you have to note about this particular question type is that it's easy to identify. How can you identify that? These type of questions will usually begin with something like, why does the professor explain something, for example, or why does the student speak X, Y, Z, A, B, C, whatever it is that is following that. Please note that sometimes the answers will have to be indirectly arrived at or inferred, or sometimes it will be directly stated by the speaker. Also, it's easy to identify because it's usually the first question after the audio file ends. It doesn't come anywhere else. Finally, you have to remember that there are two types of purpose questions. One, the gist purpose question, and the second is the gist content question. Now, the gist purpose question basically deals with the purpose of the whole passage or the whole audio. It deals with the purpose of why is this conversation taking place, or why is this lecture being delivered in the first place, right? But for the gist content question, it is all about why is the speaker saying something. So when you have these two types of questions, please remember the good news. The good news is that you will never have both these questions in response to one audio file. You will either have a gist purpose question or a gist content question, never both. So that's something to look forward to.
Hi, I'm new here. I couldn't come to the student orientation, and I'm wondering if you can give me a few quick pointers about the library. I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be glad to. What's your major area of study?
Latin American literature.
Okay. Well, over here's the section where we have language, literature, and the arts. And if you go downstairs, you'll find the history section. Generally, the students who concentrate in Latin American literature find themselves researching in the history section a lot.
You're right. I'm a transfer student. I've already done a year at another university, so I know how the research can go. I spent a lot of time in the history section. So, how long can I borrow books for?
Our loan period is a month. Oh, I should also mention that we have an interlibrary loan service. If you need to get hold of a book that's not in our library, there's a truck that runs between our library and a few other public and university libraries in this area. It comes around 3 times a week.
Hey, that's great. At my last school, it could take a really long time to get the materials I needed. So when I had a project, I had to make a plan way in advance. This sounds much faster. Another thing I was wondering is there a place where I can bring my computer and hook it up?
Sure. There's a whole area here on the main floor where you can bring a laptop and plug it in for power. But on top of that, we also have a connection for the internet at every seat.
Nice. So I can do all the research I need to do right here in the library. I'll have all the resources, all the books and information I need right here in one place.
Yep, that's the idea. I'm sure you'll need photocopiers too. They're down the hallway to your left. We have a system where you have to use a copy card, so you'll need to buy a card from the front desk. You insert it into the machine and you're ready to make copies.
How much do you guys charge?
7 cents a copy.
Oh, that's not too bad. Thanks. Where's the collection of rare books?
Rare books are up on the 2nd floor. They're in a separate room where the temperature's controlled, to preserve the old paper in them. You need to get special permission to access them, and then you have to wear gloves to handle them, because the oils in our hands, can destroy the paper, and gloves prevent that, so we have a basket of gloves in the room.
Okay, thanks. I suppose that's all I need to know. You've been very helpful. Thanks.
Anytime. Bye.
Bye.
Now that you heard that audio file, I want you to quickly take 30 seconds and answer the question that you see on your screen. Shall we start? Now that you've solved that question, let's try and understand what's the correct answer. Look at this question. What are the speakers mainly discussing here? When you look at words like mainly, you should understand that this is a purpose type of a question, and in that, the gist purpose type of a question, which means you're looking at the overall listening file and you're trying to understand what's the whole purpose there. So I'm sure you heard all these words. You heard that they were discussing about some of the books that they were reading for literature. They were also discussing various services of the library. They were making some plans for using the library effectively. So for example, you heard them say things like they can use this section, or they can use the main floor for certain things. They also talked about the rare books section, which is there in the option D. But if you see, all these are very local. That means they were mentioned only in certain parts of the conversation, and that was not the purpose of the conversation. That was not why that student went to the library, right? The whole point of that student going to the library was that he wanted to discuss this. He wanted to discuss the various services of the library because he had missed out on the orientation. That was the whole point. And that, friends, is the answer to this question. So let's mark that as the correct answer then. Now that you have heard the audio file, I want you to quickly take 30 seconds and answer this question. The next type of purpose question is the gist content type of question. It's slightly different from the gist purpose type of question in that gist purpose is about the overall purpose of the whole conversation, right? But gist content is about the purpose of a particular speaker. To look at how we should answer these questions, let's look at the questions again. Why does the student come to the library? So the question why, or the words why, should tell you why or what type of a question this is, which is the purpose type of a question. And the options are A, B, C, D here in front of you. Did he come to learn about the library's resources? Did he come to ask about the interlibrary loans? Or did he want to attend a student orientation? Or did he come there because he wanted to work on the research project? Now mind you, the librarian and the student discussed all of these. They talked about loans, they talked about the orientation. In fact, the whole point of visiting the library was because he missed the orientation, right? He also talked about working on research projects, but when you look at it, that was not the purpose, right? That was not why he came to the library. So those are not answering the questions. The only answer that I can see here is to learn about the library's resources, which kind of encompasses his whole purpose for coming there, right? So this here is the correct answer. Similarly, you have another type of a question wherein we ask you, why does the librarian point out the history section to the student? In this particular type of a question, we are talking about why a librarian does something, right? Let's take a quick minute to look at these two questions one by one. I'm going to give you 30 seconds each. What you can do is you can mark the correct answer and then we'll discuss it towards the end. Why does the librarian point out the history section to the student? Again, this question why should tell us it's a purpose question, but whose purpose is it? It's not the student's purpose this time, right? It's the librarian's purpose. So the options that we have here are A, B, C, D. Did she want to point out the closest area containing the copy machines? Did she talk about copy machines? Yes, she did. She was saying something like, this is the place where you will find the copy machines, right? Did she assume that he will need to do research there? They did talk about history section and research. So when they were talking about the history section, she did mention research there. So we'll keep that option. The student is looking for a book he used at his last school. Was that why she asked him to go to the history section? No. He was talking about interlibrary loans, and that's where he talked about how it was at his last school, right? So that's not related to the history section really. Option D says students sometimes mistakenly assume that the section contains literature books. But really, when we were talking about the history section, did we talk at all about the literature books? Not really, not in that part. So the correct answer would be she assumes that he will need to do research there, because she kind of says that there is the research section, the history section there, and most students in his domain go there and do research. So she's kind of assuming that he would want to do the same. So that's your correct answer there. So if you see, you have to understand whatever you have listened to, and you have to quickly assimilate that information to come to the main idea or the purpose behind that, whatever, the purpose behind whatever is given in the question. Now let's move forward to the next question type, which is the specific detail questions. As the name suggests, these questions will require you to remember particular and specific information. So it is in these questions that your note-taking skills will be very important. You will have to take certain notes, you will have to remember parts, or you will have to remember certain contexts that you were listening to. The good part is that the answer is always explicitly stated. So you don't really have to try and figure out any indirect meaning. What you hear is what you get, right? But don't let that fool you. Although, these questions sometimes look straightforward, but you will not, be able to find the answer so easily, right? It's a test. You will have to try and identify such questions. Usually they have stems like, according to the speaker, what is one thing that is true of X or XYZ, whatever. So when you look at these questions, understand one thing, that you have to remember only the specific details. You have to remember the main parts, right? Sometimes you may get like a more difficult question which may ask you to connect two different parts of the recording to get at the correct answer, but those are very rare, so don't worry too much about it. Just figure out what were the specific details, what were the specific points that you heard about that were explicitly stated. In the next part, let's look at some examples that will help you understand these types of questions. Let's look at this question. According to the librarian, this should give you a clue kind of, how can the students access the internet? Now, did she really talk about the internet? I want you to quickly take 30 seconds, try and remember what you heard from the audio and quickly mark the correct answer for this. Your time starts now. Did you get the correct answer? Let's see if your answer was correct. Now you have 4 options here, A, B, C and D. We have to figure out what's the correct one. Did she feel that they can use the computers down in the history section? Did she at all talk about computers in the history section? I don't think so. That's not the correct answer. She did speak about the internet, but what was that regarding? Did she ever say that the students will have to get portable internet devices? That was never mentioned in the audio, so that's the incorrect option, of course. The library offers internet connection at every seat on the main floor. She did say in one of the parts of the audio file that they can bring their laptops and they can plug it on the main floor, and it is at the same part that she's almost after this part she said that you can also get internet services at every every seat. So definitely this one looks like the correct answer. We'll keep it. Did she say students can access internet in every section of the library? No, nowhere did she say that. So this here is the correct answer. So if you see, if you missed out on that part, or if you had not made notes when you're talking about the internet, or when she was specifically talking about the internet connection, this is where you will not be able to find the correct answer. But if you've made even minor notes about the the main area part that she was talking about, you'll be able to answer this question quickly. Now let's move on to the next type of question, which a lot of students find very similar to the purpose type of questions, and sometimes they're not able to tell the difference. So I'm here for the same. Let's look at the function questions. Function questions are sometimes like miniature purpose questions, because they will usually be followed by a small sound bite, or there will be a small sound bite accompanying that question. So while you cannot really listen to the whole audio file again ever in the test, there will be certain questions where they will repeat a small part of the whole conversation and they will ask a question related to that part. And function questions sometimes fall in that category. So they could ask you, they could play a file and then they could ask you, what does he mean when he says this? Or what does she mean when she says this? So it is a kind of a purpose question, but what you're really required to find here is what is the function of whatever he said or whatever she said in the context of that conversation, right? So that's your whole strategy, how to approach this question. you will have to understand the actual meaning of something that is said. So for example, you will have to try to understand whether the speaker is trying to push the conversation towards something, like redirect the conversation, or is he trying to recommend something when he's saying that particular part, or is she trying to disagree or agree with something when she's saying that particular part? Is she questioning something that the other speaker said, or is she confirming something that the other speaker said? So there could be a lot of different permutations and combinations to this, but the only thing to remember here is the function. What is the function of what is being said? That is something that you have to try and figure out. So let's look at some of the questions to understand this in a better way. Now I want you to quickly listen to a small part of that whole conversation again, and then we'll look at the question. Here you go.
I'll have all the resources, all the books and information I need right here in one place.
Yep, that's the idea.
Which sentence best expresses what the librarian means when she says this? Yup, that's the idea. Was she saying that I wish that was true? Or was she saying that's not a very good idea? I don't think so. She actually meant, yes, this is what we actually intended, right? Because the whole conversation is about that. You can get that from the context. So you don't really need to think about such questions. It's all about just the fact that she's agreeing. Remember, some time back when we were discussing what should be the whole strategy for this type of questions, we said that the speaker is either agreeing to something that the other speaker has said, or the speaker is recommending something. Here it is quite clear that she's agreeing to what he's saying or confirming what his thoughts are. So that's how you get the right answer in these types of questions. Moving on, let's talk about the attitude type of questions. As the name suggests, in these types of questions, you have to identify accurately the speaker's attitude. What do you understand when you hear the word attitude? Someone could have a positive attitude towards something, someone could be skeptical about something. So there could be lots of things, right? You have to figure out what exactly is the speaker's attitude just from the memory of what you have heard in the audio file. Obviously, nobody's memory is so good. So what you need to do is, when you're actually listening to the file, you need to try and listen very carefully when you hear phrases like, I feel, or I think, it seems to me. These phrases that I have, on the slide here. When you hear such phrases, you will understand that it is time for the speaker's actual opinion or the speaker's attitude to come, in the file. And that's when you should actually start listening very, very carefully. And when you listen, when you actually go to the questions, how will you identify that that's an attitude type of a question? The question will always have words like, what is the librarian's attitude about XYZ? What does the student think about, or what can be inferred about? So these are the clues that you will get from the question, right? So you have to be very careful in certain parts of the audio file whenever you feel like these things are coming up. And also listen to the tone of the speaker's voice. Sometimes it could be as simple as a little shrug or a little hesitation in the speaker's voice, which kind of gives you the speaker's attitude about something. Let's look at some questions to understand what this is all about. In this question, what attitude does the student express about the interlibrary loan service at his school? We did see that in the file, the librarian was talking about some kind of a loan system. So if he doesn't find a particular book in this library, she kind of recommends that he can look for the book in some other libraries. And for that, there's a truck waiting always outside the campus, and they could order the books and things like that. So when she was saying that, okay, the student said something like, oh, this was not really available in my previous, university from where I have taken the transfer now. So his tone suddenly drops. If you remember the conversation, his tone suddenly drops very low, and he he's not really criticizing his old university, but he's kind of, you can understand that he's disappointed with the services that he was given. So the file never says that he never used the services in his old university. He never says that he had started appreciating it. Okay. He never says that it was expensive, so he didn't use it. But yes, he did say one thing. He said that at his old library, the service was, very time consuming. He had to plan days in advance before embarking on any research project. So these are the things that should tell you that, yeah, it was inconvenient for him. He doesn't say it was inconvenient, but his tone drops and he uses all these words saying that he has to really wait for a long time. That kind of shows his disapproval. So the choice of words that he uses and his tone should tell you what his attitude is all about. So this is how you will approach these types of questions. Let's move on to the next question type, which is the connecting content type of a question. Right? As the name suggests, this question deals with connecting some kind of content that you listen to, right? This will require you to show your understanding of the relationship among ideas. Remember, you cannot listen to the file again, but you did listen to the structure, you did listen to some of the ideas that came one after the other. So were you able to put together like a coherent kind of a system in your head when you were listening to that file? That is what is going to be tested. How will you get tested on this? You might have to fill a chart or a table, or the question might ask you to categorize information in certain categories, which kind of requires you to understand the structure. You might also have to put together information from different sentences or different parts of the lecture. So for example, if the lecture has 3 parts, the connecting content kind of a question will ask you to identify something from part 1 and also remember something from part 3, and then the question would be designed in such a way that you need to know both the parts to be able to answer that. It's as simple as that. What forms can it take basically? It can take forms like you might be asked to identify steps in a certain process. The key here is whenever you seem to figure out that there is a process in the audio file, when you're listening to it, okay, you kind of try and understand that there is some kind of a process now that they are going to explain. Listen very carefully at that moment, because there will almost always be a connecting content type of a question there. There could also be a cause and effect kind of a relationship between ideas. So something happened and because of that something else happened, right? So these two things are connected. If you're not able to identify those connections, it will be difficult for you to resolve these kind of questions, the connecting content type. Another form that this question could take is the classification type of a question. So when I say classification, you could be given a table and you could probably be required to classify information in X, Y, Z categories. Again, to do that, you need to have a good understanding of what you heard and what were the different categories in the conversation or the lecture that you heard, right? The final way in which this question could present itself is by, you requiring to make a prediction. So in order to make a prediction as well, you would need to know the categories, or you would need to be able to put together the relationships between different ideas. To understand this in a clearer manner, let's look at a question and then we'll be able to figure out how to approach these questions probably better. Let's listen to this conversation and then answer the question based on that.
The professor is discussing the theater of 19th century France.
The 19th century was the time that saw what we call realism develop in the European theater. To understand this, though, we first need to look at an earlier form of drama known as the well-made play, which basically was a pattern for constructing plays. Plays that, beginning with some early 19th century comedies in France, proved very successful commercially. The dramatic devices used here weren't actually anything new. They'd been around for centuries. But the formula for a well-made play required that certain of these elements be included in a particular order, and most importantly, that everything in the play be logically connected. In fact, some of these playwrights would start by writing the end of a play and work backward toward the beginning, just to make sure each event led logically from what had gone before. Okay, so what are the necessary elements of a well-made play? Well, the first is logical exposition. Exposition is whatever background information you have to reveal to the audience so they'll understand what's going on. Before this time, exposition might have come from actors simply giving speeches. Someone might walk out on a stage and say, "In fair Verona, where we lay our scene," and then tell all about the feuding families of Romeo and Juliet. But for the well-made play, even the exposition had to be logical, believable. So, for example, you might have two servants gossiping as they're cleaning the house, and one says, "Oh, what a shame the master's son is still not married." And the other might mention a rumor about a mysterious gentleman who's just moved into town with his beautiful daughter. These comments are part of the play's logical exposition. The next key element of a well-made play is referred to as the inciting incident. After we have the background information, we need a key moment that gets things moving, that really makes the audience interested in what happens to the characters we just heard about. So, for example, after the two servants reveal all this background information, we meet the young man, just as he first lays eyes on the beautiful young woman and immediately falls in love. This is the inciting incident. It sets off the plot of the play. Now, the plot of a well-made play is usually driven by secrets, things that the audience knows, but the characters often don't know. So, for example, the audience learns through a letter or through someone else's conversation who this mysterious gentleman is and why he left the town many years before. But the young man doesn't know about this, and the woman doesn't understand the ancient connection between her family and his. And before the secrets are revealed to the main characters, the plot of the play proceeds as a series of sort of up and down moments. For example, the woman first appears not to even notice the young man, and it seems to him like the end of the world. But then he learns that she actually wants to meet him too, so life is wonderful. Then, if he tries to talk with her, maybe her father gets furious for no apparent reason, so they can't see each other. But just as the young man has almost lost all hope, he finds out, well, you get the idea. The reversals of fortune continue, increasing the audience's tension and excitement, making them wonder if everything's going to come out okay or not. Next comes an element known as the obligatory scene. It's a scene, a moment, in which all the secrets are revealed, and generally things turn out well for the hero and others we care about. A happy ending of some sort. This became so popular that a playwright almost had to include it in every play, which is why it's called the obligatory scene. And that's followed by the final dramatic element, the denouement, or the resolution, when all the loose ends have to be tied up in a logical way. Remember, the obligatory scene gives the audience emotional pleasure, but the denouement offers the audience a logical conclusion. That's the subtle distinction we need to try very hard to keep in mind. So, as I said, the well-made play, this form of playwriting, became the basis for realism in drama and for a lot of very popular 19th century plays, and also a pattern we find in the plots of many later plays and even movies that we see today.
Look at the question on the screen. According to the professor, what dramatic elements are typically included in a well-made play to help move the plot forward? You have to choose two answers. I'm going to quickly give you 30 seconds to look at the options and choose the two correct options for this question. Your time starts now. I hope you marked the correct answer. Let's see how we go about this. Now the question should give you a clue in these words according to the professor. Now usually connecting content questions will start with these types of phrases, but when you look at this particular part, choose two answers, it should kind of tell you that okay, now you're supposed to connect different parts and maybe those two parts will be related to the same thing that they are talking about. In the question, they're talking about dramatic elements, right? And if you heard the file right, they were talking about different dramatic elements. They were talking about the different parts of a play. And the first part was exposition, the second part was an inciting incident, and there was a part about some obligatory scene, and then there was another part about the end or the denouement. They talked about these parts, and especially in the two parts, the inciting incident and the obligatory scene, they said something like these were important for, taking the steps forward, taking the story forward. Well, they didn't directly say that, but they gave certain examples. Do you remember what those examples were? Memory plays a very big part here, right? Let's look at the options and see if the options that we have match the examples that we kind of heard at least a little bit. The first option says a series of major changes in the hero's apparent chances of success. Now, while you may not have heard these exact same words in the file, did you hear anything that was related to the hero's, the changes in the hero's condition basically? Yes, there was an example which the speaker gave to help you understand what is an inciting incident. So he talked about, how a hero probably could move, how his fortunes could change, from bad days to good days to bad days again. So there was a twist and turn of fortunes. So yes, the speaker did speak about a series of major changes. So this could be, our answer. Let's just keep it. The second option is the introduction of new characters midway through the play. We did not hear any kind of a mention of, introducing new characters or any examples about such things. So we can safely say that this is not the correct answer, right? What about the information known to the audience but not to the main characters? If you remember very clearly, when they were all, again talking about the inciting incident, the lecturer did mention that the workers in the house knew something, but the young man who was the character did not know that. So indirectly, that took that action forward, that took the play forward, that was a moment in the play. So that definitely indirectly here the question says that there is some kind of information known to the audience, but not to the main characters, right? So that kind of gives away that this is given in the passage. So we should keep this, answer. The movement of major characters from one setting to another. Did we see that happening anywhere through the audio file? Did they talk about it? Did they talk about characters moving from, say, a city to a rural area? They didn't do that. So that was not a factor that was typically included in a well-made play, right? So that we can strike that out. What remains is your correct answer. So your two choices are A and C. This is how you will arrive at the correct answer. You will connect at what, you will connect different dots based on what you have heard. And a lot of times they'll not be directly given, But the clue here is whenever they say examples or for example or for instance, you could start listening very clearly at that point in time and you will find the answers there for sure. Let's look at the next question in a moment. In this type of a question, you will have to focus on understanding the structure of the passage. Where has the flow of information started? Where is it going and where does it end? You will have to understand the coherence markers. You will have to understand the storyline basically, in short. How do you identify such things? When you look at the question, you will be able to easily identify such questions when you see such phrases. Why does the professor mention X, Y, Z? Or why does the speaker discuss this? Initially, it might look like a purpose question because of this word why here, right? That could kind of question you, is this about the purpose? But really, if you remember, the purpose questions were all about the purpose of the passage overall or the purpose of a particular speaker when they say something. While in an organization question, you could have a similar structure, right? The focus of the question will be on understanding the lecture structure. It will not be on the purpose of what the person is saying. So we'll understand this when we actually look at an example. When you look at these types of questions or when you're listening to an audio file, listen very actively for some signal words. Okay, so maybe they are introducing an idea and they are saying things like first XYZ, next BCD, then finally, all these things, these things are called discourse markers, right? So these things are very important. They give you an understanding of structure. Okay, this is idea number 1, this is idea number 2, and now this is idea number 3. You will also have to kind of very carefully listen to some words like obviously, of course, accordingly, as a result, as a consequence. These words typically bring in major ideas in the conversation or the lecture. So you have to very, very sharply listen for these words. Other such, signal words could be, for example, for instance, right? Or if it's a conclusion marker, you would have words like in conclusion, to summarize. These things kind of give you an idea of the overall structure of the passage. It tells you where the idea began, where is it going, and where does it end, right? So to better understand this type of a question, let's actually look at a question in the next slide, and then we come back to further explanation.
The professor is discussing the theater of 19th century France.
The 19th century was the time that saw what we call realism develop in the European theater. To understand this, though, we first need to look at an earlier form of drama known as the well-made play, which basically was a pattern for constructing plays. Plays that, beginning with some early 19th century comedies in France, proved very successful commercially. The dramatic devices used here weren't actually anything new. They'd been around for centuries. But the formula for a well-made play required that certain of these elements be included in a particular order, and most importantly, that everything in the play be logically connected. In fact, some of these playwrights would start by writing the end of a play and work backward toward the beginning, just to make sure each event led logically from what had gone before. Okay, so what are the necessary elements of a well-made play? Well, the first is logical exposition. Exposition is whatever background information you have to reveal to the audience so they'll understand what's going on. Before this time, exposition might have come from actors simply giving speeches. Someone might walk out on a stage and say, "In fair Verona, where we lay our scene," and then tell all about the feuding families of Romeo and Juliet. But for the well-made play, even the exposition had to be logical, believable. So, for example, you might have two servants gossiping as they're cleaning the house, And one says, "Oh, what a shame the master's son is still not married." And the other might mention a rumor about a mysterious gentleman who's just moved into town with his beautiful daughter. These comments are part of the play's logical exposition.
Look at the question. Why does the professor mention a conversation between two servants? Now, if you see, all of this is related to this whole central idea, which is the well-made play. Okay, but if you listen to that part carefully, when he was talking about the servants, right, he said something about how in the exposition also the authors would need to kind of make it believable, right? So he is talking about the servants when he's talking about the exposition part, and the exposition part actually gives us the background information, which is here. So that is why this is the correct answer for us. So you see, when you look at this type of a question, you will always be able to identify it using some of the discourse markers or signal words that we just talked about, and you will be able to kind of identify and relate to that and answer this very easily. It's not very difficult. And finally, the last type of questions that you will usually find on the test, that's the inference question type. From the name, you can kind of guess that this question will require you to understand the indirect meaning of something. So you need to get good at understanding what is not said and getting the idea or getting the meaning of the unstated. What you need to do is you need to look for phrases in the questions like these. What are the implications of? What can be inferred from? What does the professor imply? These are certain cues that will give you an understanding that, okay, now you're looking at an inference question. So the answer is not going to be probably something that was explicitly said in the audio file. It was probably intended meaning, right? So let's look at a question to understand this better.
Next comes an element known as the obligatory scene. It's a scene, a moment, in which all the secrets are revealed, and generally things turn out well for the hero and others we care about. A happy ending of some sort. This became so popular that a playwright almost had to include it in every play, which is why it's called the obligatory scene. And that's followed by the final dramatic element, the denouement, or the resolution, when all the loose ends have to be tied up in a logical way. Remember, the obligatory scene gives the audience emotional pleasure, but the denouement offers the audience a logical conclusion. That's the subtle distinction we need to try very hard to keep in mind. So, as I said, the well-made play, this form of playwriting, became the basis for realism in drama and for a lot of very popular 19th century plays, and also a pattern we find in the plots of many later plays and even movies that we see today.
What does the professor imply about the obligatory scene and the denouement? Now, when you're looking at this question, this word is key here, imply. When you look at this word, you should understand, kind of predict that this is an implication kind of a question or an inference kind of a question. So sometimes the answer will not be directly given in the audio file that you just heard. Let's look at what our options are. A. The difference between them might be unclear to some people. Did the speaker say that? Not really. Both are useful techniques for developing realistic characters. Did the lecturer anywhere say that both these scenes, the obligatory scene and the denouement, both of them are really useful? Did he say words like useful or any synonyms of useful? Not really, right? What about option C? The denouement usually occurs within the obligatory scene. That's actually not true, because he very distinctly said that these are two different things, right? So that option's also gone. Option number option D, which is the last option, the obligatory scene is usually less exciting than the denouement. Now, we did not talk about anything related to excitement or anything remotely related to that word. So this option is also not correct. Then what is the correct answer? If we have struck out all the options, what are we remaining with? Nothing, right? This is the sense that you will usually get when you look at such questions. You will be lost sometimes because you will not find the answer so easily. This is because we are looking at the implied meaning again and not the literal meaning. We do remember that at some part he spoke about the difference between the obligatory scene and the denouement. Do you remember what that part was? Correct. He spoke about how these are different. He said that the obligatory scene is basically required for the emotional pleasure of the audience, and the denouement, on the other hand, is required for a logical conclusion of the play, right? And then he said something very specific. He said, we must try very hard to remember this. Now, when you say you must try very hard to remember something, isn't it clear that is because it might be unclear to some people? That's right. So even if it's not directly said, what we are looking at here is the inferred meaning, that he really said that we have to try hard to remember this. So that's a clue, and if we remember that, we'll be able to mark the correct answer in this. With this, we come to the end of all our question types, and we have explained all the question types as much as possible. I hope this was an enjoyable session for you. Thank you so much.